Curiosity stirs when we wander into the vast, untamed expanses of the American West in the 18th century. Curiosity about lives carved from grit and discuriosity about the ways men and women endured the harsh, open lands. Curiosity about the unspoken codes of honor and courage that guided settles. Curiosity about love that bloomed in the shadows of survival. Curiosity about a story that begins with loss and ends with an unexpected promise. This is the story of a rancher, a widow, and a marriage born from both necessity and heart. It is a tale that moves quietly across the sweeping plains, where wind whispers secrets through tall grasses, where the sun bleeds gold into the horizon, and where the lives of ordinary people became extraordinary through acts of courage and compassion. Our story begins in the small homestead of Margaret Whitmore, a woman whose life was upended by the sudden death of her husband, leaving her with a sprawling ranch and a farmstead, burdened by debt. The kind of farm where the fences sagged under the weight of time, where the cattle strayed into thorny thickets, and where survival demanded both skill and a fair measure of luck. Margaret, known to the neighbors for her sharp mind and gentle hands, found herself at the mercy of the unforgiving land, townsfolk whispering about her plight as she struggled to feed the remaining livestock and manage creditors who were less than kind. This is when Daniel McCaffrey entered her life, a rugged rancher with weathered hands, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a reputation for honesty that drew both admiration and suspicion. Daniel was a man who had built his life on the back of hard work, tending to his own herd while navigating the treacherous currents of frontier life. He had come to Margaret's homestead initially to negotiate the sale of some cattle, but what he found was more than a business opportunity. Found a woman with resilience that matched the land itself. He saw in her eyes the reflection of a life that refused to yield to misfortune. He watched her as she coaxed a stubborn mule through the muddy corral, as she mended a torn fence with patience and precision, as she counted coins with a care born of necessity. Daniel understood. In that instant, that helping Margaret would not be a matter of mere charity. It would be a partnership, a union not only of survival but of respect and, perhaps, something more tender. Margaret, for her part, had observed Daniel long before he arrived at her door. The stories of his exploits traveling on the winch had not imagined that such a man would pause at her life. But when he did, when he offered his assistance without condescension, she felt a cautious hope, one that mingled with grief, with fear, with the stark reality of widowhood in the West. The months that followed were filled with hard labor and quiet companionship. Daniel worked alongside Margaret, repairing fences, herding cattle, and tending to the crops. They spoke little at first, the language of action more eloquent than words. Yet in every gesture, in every shared meal, in every night spent around the fire discussing plans for the ranch, a bond began to form, the kind of bond that does not announce itself with fanfare, but grows quietly, inexorably, like the roots of an ancient oak. Daniel's presence brought a sense of security that Margaret had not known. Since her husband's passing, he handled the work of the ranch with a skill that relieved her burdens and allowed her to breathe. Yet it was not just the labor he offered. It was the kindness, the listening ear, the occasional, subtle humor that made her smile even on the most difficult days. The community began to notice the partnership, neighbors remarking on how the widow and the rancher moved through their days with an almost instinctive coordination. It was clear to all that Daniel's help was more than mere duty. It was devotion. But the West, harsh as it was, offered no guarantees. Creditors still pressed, storms still threatened the crops, and bandits prowled the trails. Yet together, Margaret and Daniel weathered each challenge, their combined efforts transforming the struggling homestead into a working, thriving ranch. As the seasons turned, a winter arrived harsher than any Margaret could recall. Snow piling high against the fences, cattle lost in drifting fields, water frozen solid in troughs, the nights bitter with cold, the hearth's warmth almost insufficient against the relentless frost. It was then that Daniel's steadfastness shone brightest. He rode out in blizzards, searched the fields for lost livestock, repaired broken structures with frost-bitten hands, always returning with a weary smile and a promise that they would endure. Margaret watched him and felt a stirring she had not expected, a recognition that life, even in its harshest form, could bring moments of beauty and connection. It was during one such evening, as the wind howled like a living thing through the pines and the fire flickered in the cabin, that Daniel spoke the words that would change everything. He said simply, "I will not leave you to face this alone." Margaret, moved beyond words, realized that his offer was not only one of practical assistance, but of companionship, of love. In that moment, the idea of marriage, once a distant thought, became a living, breathing possibility. They married under the wide, open sky, with the community gathered in humble celebration. The ceremony simple, heartfelt, a testament to endurance and mutual respect. Vows whispered amidst the scent of pine and smoke. Promises made that life together would be one of shared burdens and shared joys. And so began a new chapter, one where the ranch flourished under their joint care, where nights were shared by the fire, stories told and retold, laughter echoing across the plains, where children, if they care, would inherit not just land but a legacy of resilience. Daniel and Margaret's story became a legend, whispered along trails and in the town's saloons, a story of how the West, in all its unforgiving beauty, could nurture courage and show a widowed woman and a rancher. Strangers bound by circumstance could find in each other a partner for life. In every season, in every storm, in every quiet sunrise, over the prairie their union stood as proof that survival alone is not enough, that companionship, respect, and love are the true rewards of frontier life. The documentary of their lives, if told in full, would trace each fence mended, each field plowed, each difficult winter survived, and in every frame, it would reveal the quiet heroism of everyday existence, the courage to offer help without expectation, the bravery to accept it, the audacity to build a life in a land that offers no easy path, and through it all, the love that grew slowly, imperceptibly, until it became as essential as the air, as enduring as the land itself. We leave the story not at the moment of marriage, but at the horizon, where the sun rises over the ranch, golden light spilling across fields, where Daniel and Margaret stand together, hands intertwined, eyes toward the future, and the wind carries their story across the West, a story of hope, endurance, and the remarkable power of human connection. Life on the ranch was not merely work. It was a rhythm dictated by the land and season's. Curiosity about each day's challenges drove Margaret and Daniel to wake with the sun, to tend cattle grazing in dew-soaked pastures, to check fences sagging under winter's weight, to coax stubborn horses into harness. It was a life of relentless labor, yet one rich with quiet triumphs. Daniel taught Margaret the subtle ways of the cattle, the way a herd senses danger, how the wind carries scents that can forewarn of predators or storms. Margaret shared her knowledge of planting, of soil, of how to coax growth from stubborn earth. Together, they became more than rancher and widow. They became partners in every sense, their bond strengthened by the labor that defined frontier life. Curiosity about their methods spread among neighbors. Whispers traveled from homestead to homestead about the widow who had regained prosperity, with the help of a man who treated her not as someone to be pitied, but as an equal. And it was true. Daniel's respect for Margaret was evident in everything he did. He listened to her plans, he asked her opinion before making decisions, he sought her counsel on matters of trade and cattle, and in return, Margaret trusted him, not merely for his skill and experience, but for his judgment, his heart, and his unwavering support. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came new challenges, floods that threatened crops, rustlers who prowled the outskirts of settlement, disease that could strike livestock without warning. Yet each trial only strengthened their partnership. Curiosity about the resilience of people in such harsh lands became apparent in their daily choices, in the way Margaret and Daniel fortified their barns, in the way they shared the work with hired hands and neighbors, in the way they celebrated small victories. A calf born healthy after a long night, a fence repaired before a storm, a wagon arriving with supplies. These moments, seemingly ordinary, became markers of survival and of life renewed. One evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, Margaret reflected on how far she had come. Grief had once shadowed every corner of her heart, yet now there was hope, there was laughter, there was the quiet joy of partnership. She watched Daniel, silhouetted against the horizon, guiding a stubborn mule back to the corral, and felt a warmth she had not imagined possible after loss. It was in these moments that the seeds of love, sown in shared hardship and respect, blossomed. The story of the ranch, of survival, and of love spread beyond the homestead. Travelers on dusty roads recounted tales of the widow and the rancher who had carved a life from unforgiving land. The story of the ranch, of survival, and of love spread beyond the homestead. Travelers on dusty roads recounted tales of the widow and the rancher who had carved a life from unforgiving land. Yet life was not only labor. There were moments of beauty, of tenderness, of small adventures that reminded them both that life was more than survival. Curiosity drove them to explore the rolling hills beyond their fields, to ride horses into canyons where wildflowers painted the earth, to sit by the river and watch the sun glint off water. Daniel shared stories of his youth, tales of long cattle drives, encounters with bandits, near escapes from stampedes, and Margaret shared memories of her husband, of family gatherings, of dances in the town hall. In sharing these stories, they discovered not only each other's strength, but the vulnerabilities that made them human. And in the quiet evenings, with the fire crackling and the stars blazing overhead, they found comfort in knowing that their lives, once lonely and uncertain, were now intertwined. Winter returned with its icy grip, and with it came perhaps the hardest test of all. A blizzard of rare ferocity swept across the plains, stranding cattle in the open, flattening fences, and cutting off access to the nearest town. Curiosity about survival now became an urgent, practical concern. Daniel, refusing to risk lives needlessly, rode out into the white storm, guiding the herd toward safety, while Margaret coordinated efforts from the homestead, securing food, tending to the sick, and rallying their hired hands. It was a grueling week, the wind howling like wolves, snowdrifts taller than a man, and yet, through it all, they endured. And it was during this trial that the depth of their connection became undeniable. Daniel returned, exhausted but triumphant, and Margaret met him at the door, hands freezing but hearts full. No words were necessary, for in the shared silence of survival, love spoke louder than any vow. Spring brought renewal, crops sprouted green against dark, fertile soil, calves frolicked in pastures, and the ranch, once threatened by loss and hardship, flourished. The community celebrated with them, a gathering of neighbors, friends, and hired hands, bringing food, music, and stories. It was a rare moment of festivity, a reminder that life, even on the frontier, held joy, laughter, and human connection. It was during this time that the marriage, formalized under the wide western sky, took on the full meaning of partnership. The ceremony, simple but profound, officiated by a local preacher, neighbors witnessing the joining of two resilient spirits. Vows made with the wind carrying them across fields, promises to work together, to care for one another, and to face all future storms as one. Curiosity about love in such harsh lands was rewarded by the sight of Margaret and Daniel, hands clasped, eyes bright with hope, ready to embrace the life they had fought to build together. As years passed, children came to fill the homestead with laughter, running through fields, learning the ways of the ranch, learning also the lessons of resilience, of hard work, of compassion. Margaret and Daniel became teachers not only of survival, but of character, raising their family with the same principles that had guided them through hardship. Curiosity about the West, about human endurance, about love forged in adversity, continued as they expanded the ranch, introduced new methods of irrigation, built sturdier barns, and ensured that the homestead would endure long after they were gone. The land, once untamed and threatening, became a canvas for their vision, a place where love and labor intertwined, a living testament to the idea that even in the harshest of environments, humans could create warmth, comfort, and prosperity. Their story, told through generations, became legend, not merely for the survival of a widow and a rancher, but for the example they set of partnership, courage, and love. Every valley they crossed, every trail they rode, every neighbor they assisted, echoed with the narrative of resilience. Their marriage, while born from circumstance, matured into a profound connection, a reminder that in the 18th century West, survival alone was not enough. Trust, respect, and affection were as crucial as food, water, and shelter. And as the documentary pans across the rolling hills, the morning sun igniting the horizon, the wind stirring the tall grasses, the distant lowing of cattle signaling a new day, we see not only the land, but the imprint of human hearts upon it. Curiosity about the human spirit is answered in the quiet heroism of everyday acts, the courage to help, the bravery to accept help, and the audacity to love amidst adversity. Daniel and Margaret's legacy, captured in letters, in diaries, in the memories of neighbors, speaks across centuries, reminding us that even in a world of dust and hardship, generosity, endurance, and love can flourish. The documentary concludes as it began, with curiosity about how ordinary lives, when met with extraordinary courage and compassion, can leave an imprint on history. Curiosity about how a widow, once alone, could find a partner not just for survival, but for life. Curiosity about how a rancher, guided by integrity and heart, could transform not only a homestead, but the life of another human being. As the camera fades from the sun-drenched pastures, lingering on the cabin where the couple stands hand in hand, we carry with us the lesson of the West, a lesson that endures. Love and labor, when intertwined, can conquer even the harshest lands. A story of Margaret Whitmore and Daniel McCaffrey, a tale of hardship, hope, and enduring devotion, becomes more than history. It becomes inspiration, a reminder that even in the 18th century frontier, hearts can find one another, and in doing so, create a life far richer than survival alone could ever promise.